Across the United States, some criminal cases are officially marked as solved, filed away with conclusions that appear final. But years later, certain details refuse to settle. Missing evidence, conflicting timelines, unexplained injuries, and records that don't fully align with the official narrative. Quiet doubts continue to follow these investigations. In this video, we'll break down 7 American crimes that were closed by authorities, yet still raise serious questions. The death of Ray Rivera, Maryland, 2006. On the evening of May 16, 2006, 32-year-old Ray Rivera received a phone call at his home in the Northwood neighborhood of Baltimore, Maryland. According to his wife, Allison Rivera, the call came from the office switchboard of Stansberry and Associates Investment Research, a financial publishing company where Rivera occasionally worked on video projects and writing assignments. Moments after answering, Rivera abruptly left the house. He appeared hurried but not distressed. Allison later recalled that he simply said he had to leave and would be back soon. It was the last time she saw him alive. Rivera's car, a silver SUV, was later found parked near the Belvedere Hotel in downtown Baltimore, a historic building that had once been one of the city's grandest luxury hotels and had since been converted into condominiums and offices. For several days, Rivera was listed as a missing person. Friends and family organized searches throughout the city, distributing flyers and contacting hospitals. Nearly a week later, on May 23rd, a group of employees from a nearby office building noticed a hole in the lower roof of the Belvedere's annex structure. The hole was small but unusual. Beneath it, in a conference room that was rarely used, investigators discovered Rivera's decomposing body. The initial theory from police was that Rivera had jumped from the top of the Belvedere's main roof, falling more than 100 feet before crashing through the metal roof below. However, several aspects of the scene quickly raised questions. The hole in the roof was relatively small and clean, and some structural experts later said the damage pattern seemed inconsistent with a body falling from that height. Even more puzzling was Rivera's apparent trajectory. The distance between the roof edge and the hole suggested a long horizontal leap that investigators said would have been difficult to achieve without a running start. Rivera was not known to have any connection to the building's rooftop, and no witnesses reported seeing him there that evening. When detectives examined Rivera's belongings, they found his cell phone and eyeglasses on the roof near the hole. Both appeared to be largely intact. The glasses were not significantly damaged, and the phone still powered on. To some investigators, this detail seemed unusual given the height of the fall. During the search of Rivera's home, police discovered something even more perplexing. Taped behind his computer monitor was a folded piece of paper containing a long typed note. The document included lists of movies, books, and famous historical figures. It referenced secret societies, Freemasonry, and phrases about the game and participants. The writing appeared fragmented, almost like a stream of consciousness. Some passages seemed to reference films such as The Matrix and National Treasure. One section read, "That was a well-played game. Congratulations to all who participated." Detectives were unsure how to interpret the note. The Baltimore Police Department consulted with the FBI for assistance in analyzing the document. According to reports, the Bureau concluded that the structure of the writing resembled what they described as delusional or disorganized thought patterns, though no official psychiatric diagnosis was ever established for Rivera. Family members strongly disputed the idea that Rivera had been experiencing mental instability. Allison Rivera later said her husband had been optimistic about his future and was actively working on writing projects and film ideas. In the weeks before his death, however, Allison reported 2 unusual incidents. On 2 separate nights, the house alarm suddenly activated after midnight. Rivera ran outside with a baseball bat, believing someone might be approaching the home. When police arrived, they found no intruders. Rivera reportedly told his wife that he believed someone might be watching their house. Investigators also looked closely at Rivera's professional relationship with Porter Stansberry, the founder of Stansberry and Associates. Rivera and Stansberry had been close friends years earlier in California, before Rivera moved to Baltimore for work opportunities connected to the company. After Rivera's body was discovered, Stansberry issued a brief statement expressing condolences to the family. Shortly afterward, employees at the company were instructed not to speak with investigators without legal representation. According to police records, the company never provided further public comment about the case. The Baltimore Medical Examiner later ruled Rivera's death as undetermined. The autopsy documented multiple fractures consistent with a high fall, but also noted injuries that some observers considered unusual, including damage to the lower legs that appeared inconsistent with the presumed landing position. Because of the decomposition of the body, some aspects of the trauma could not be clearly analyzed. Without definitive evidence of suicide or homicide, the official classification remained inconclusive. For Alison Rivera, the unanswered questions have never disappeared. She has repeatedly stated that she does not believe her husband jumped from the Belvedere roof. Investigators never determined exactly how Rivera entered the building or how he would have accessed the locked rooftop area. Security cameras in the building were limited, and no footage placed him inside that night. The origin of the phone call that prompted Rivera to leave home also remained unclear. Records showed the call was routed through the company's switchboard, but the internal extension that placed it was never identified. Nearly 2 decades later, the circumstances surrounding Ray Rivera's final hours remain uncertain. His body was discovered beneath a hole in a roof, in a building he had no known reason to visit, after receiving a mysterious phone call that has never been fully traced. The official case file lists the cause of death as undetermined, leaving investigators with a conclusion that closes nothing. The murder of Mary Pinchot Meyer, Washington, D.C., 1964. On the afternoon of October 12, 1964, Mary Pinchot Meyer left her home in Georgetown and began what appeared to be a routine walk along the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal towpath in Washington, D.C. The area was quiet that day. The narrow dirt path followed the water through a corridor of trees and stone walls only a few miles from the center of the nation's capital. Around 12:20 p.m., several people nearby heard 2 sharp gunshots echo along the canal. A construction worker named Henry Wiggins was one of the first to react. When he ran toward the sound, he saw a woman lying on the path near the canal's edge. Blood was spreading beneath her head and shoulder. Meyer had been shot twice at close range, once in the head and once in the chest. She died within minutes. Police arrived quickly and began sealing off the area. Mary Pinchot Meyer was not an ordinary resident of Washington. She came from a prominent and well-connected family. Her father had been a senior official in the Roosevelt administration. Her sister, Antoinette Pinchot Bradley, was married to Ben Bradley, who would later become the executive editor of the Washington Post. Meyer herself was an accomplished painter and a well-known figure in Georgetown's social circles. More significantly, she had once been married to Cord Meyer, a high-ranking official in the Central Intelligence Agency. After their divorce in 1958, Mary remained part of Washington's elite political and intellectual community. Investigators soon learned that Meyer had also been romantically involved with President John F. Kennedy before his assassination the previous year. The relationship had never been officially acknowledged, but it was widely known among certain Washington insiders. The possibility that a woman with connections to both the White House and the CIA had been murdered in broad daylight raised immediate concern among authorities. Within hours of the shooting, police detained a suspect. A mechanic named Raymond Crump Jr. had been seen in the area near the canal around the time of the murder. A witness named Lieutenant William Mitchell, an Army officer who had been jogging along the towpath, reported seeing a black man standing near the body shortly after the shots were fired. According to Mitchell, the man appeared wet and disheveled, as if he had fallen into the canal. Police soon located Crump nearby. His clothes were damp and muddy. He claimed he had been fishing along the canal bank when he heard the gunshots and became frightened. Crump insisted he had nothing to do with the killing. He told officers he had fallen into the water while trying to hide after hearing the shots. Despite the lack of a weapon and no direct physical evidence linking him to the crime, prosecutors charged Crump with Meyer's murder. The trial began the following summer in 1965. Crump's defense attorney, Dovey Johnson Roundtree, a civil rights lawyer and former Army officer, argued that the prosecution's case was based almost entirely on circumstantial observations. No gun had ever been recovered. Ballistics evidence could not connect Crump to the shooting. Roundtree also pointed out that Crump, who was 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed around 130 pounds, would likely have struggled to overpower Meyer, who was physically strong and known to be an avid athlete. Several witnesses testified during the trial, but none could place a weapon in Crump's hands. After only a few hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty. Raymond Crump walked free from the courthouse, leaving the murder officially unsolved. What happened next added another unusual layer to the case. Within days of Meyer's death, her sister Antoinette and her brother-in-law Ben Bradley went to Mary's Georgetown home to retrieve her personal belongings. According to Bradley's later account, they discovered that Mary had kept a private diary detailing aspects of her life in Washington, including her relationship with President Kennedy. Bradley later wrote that while searching the house, they encountered James Jesus Angleton, the powerful chief of CIA counterintelligence. Angleton reportedly told them he had come to retrieve Meyer's diary. According to Bradley, Angleton claimed the agency wanted to secure any material that might contain sensitive information. Bradley said he and his wife had already removed the diary before Angleton arrived. Years later, Bradley stated that the diary eventually disappeared. No confirmed copy has ever surfaced publicly. The alleged encounter between Bradley and Angleton has never been fully explained, and the CIA has consistently denied involvement in Meyer's death. Investigators also faced other unanswered questions. Meyer's purse and personal items were found neatly arranged near her body, suggesting robbery was not a motive. Witness accounts differed slightly on the timeline of the shooting. Some said they saw a second unidentified man in the area shortly before the gunshots, though police were never able to confirm this observation. The weapon used in the killing was never recovered. The case gradually faded from active investigation, overshadowed by the political turbulence of the late 1960s and the continuing revelations surrounding President Kennedy's assassination. Over time, the killing of Mary Pinchot Meyer became a quiet but persistent mystery in Washington history. A woman deeply connected to the highest levels of American political power had been shot to death in a public park in the middle of the day. The only man ever charged with the crime had been acquitted. The missing diary, the intelligence community connections, and the lack of clear motive left investigators with fragments rather than answers. More than 60 years later, the official record still lists the murder of Mary Pinchot Meyer as unsolved. The death of Kendrick Johnson, Georgia, 2013. On the morning of January 11, 2013, students began arriving at Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia, after the first bell had already rung. Classes were starting, and the school's main gymnasium sat mostly empty, except for a few students passing through between periods. Around 10:30 a.m., a group of students walked into the old gym looking for a pair of athletic shoes they believed had been left behind the previous day. The gym stored dozens of large blue wrestling mats, standing upright against a wall. Each mat was tightly rolled and placed vertically, forming narrow cylindrical gaps between them. While looking between the mats, one of the students noticed something unusual. At the bottom of one mat, a pair of white socks and legs were visible, pointing upward from inside the rolled cylinder. When school staff were alerted, they quickly realized a student was trapped inside. The body belonged to 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson, a junior at the school. Johnson's body was positioned upside down inside the mat, with his feet toward the ceiling and his head buried near the floor at the bottom of the roll. Emergency responders arrived, but Kendrick was already dead. According to early police reports, investigators initially believed the teenager had climbed into the mat while attempting to retrieve a pair of sneakers stored inside. Several students later confirmed that it was common for athletes to place their shoes in the hollow center of the rolled mats to keep them off the gym floor. Detectives theorized that Johnson may have reached into the mat for his shoes, slipped headfirst, and become stuck. Because the opening was narrow and the mat tightly rolled, investigators believed he may have been unable to pull himself back out. The Lowndes County Sheriff's Office soon classified the death as a tragic accident. However, almost immediately, Johnson's family began questioning the official explanation. Kendrick's parents, Kenneth and Jacqueline Johnson, said their son was physically strong and athletic. He played football and basketball and was accustomed to physical activity. They struggled to believe he could have become trapped without being able to free himself. When the initial autopsy results were released, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation ruled the cause of death positional asphyxia. According to the report, Johnson's body position inside the mat would have restricted his breathing. Blood pooled in his head and chest due to gravity, eventually causing fatal oxygen deprivation. Yet the unusual position of the body raised questions among some observers. Photographs from the scene showed Johnson's arms pinned tightly against his sides, which investigators said was consistent with the narrow shape of the mat. But critics argued that if he had entered head first, instinct would have led him to extend his arms outward to stop the fall. Another detail that drew attention involved injuries noted during the autopsy. The medical examiner documented bruising on Johnson's neck and jaw area. Authorities said these injuries likely occurred after death, as the body was removed from the mat or during transportation. The family was not convinced. Several months later, the Johnson family hired a private forensic pathologist to conduct an independent autopsy after Kendrick's body was exhumed. That examiner concluded the injuries appeared more consistent with blunt force trauma to the neck. The conflicting findings intensified public debate about the circumstances of the death. Surveillance footage from the school also became a major focus of the investigation. Cameras in the gymnasium area had recorded activity during the morning hours when Johnson disappeared. However, some segments of footage appeared to skip frames or show time gaps between images. Authorities explained that the system was motion activated and recorded at low frame rates, which could create the appearance of missing footage. Investigators said the recordings showed no other students entering the gym area during the period when Johnson likely died. Despite this, critics argued that the limited video quality made it difficult to confirm exactly what happened inside the gym that morning. As the case drew national attention, rumors and speculation began circulating online. Some individuals suggested Kendrick may have been involved in a conflict with other students before his death. The Johnson family later filed a civil lawsuit naming two classmates as possible suspects, alleging the teenagers had assaulted Kendrick and placed his body inside the mat. The students denied the accusation, and investigators stated they found no evidence supporting that claim. Federal authorities eventually reviewed the case after requests from the Johnson family and community activists. In 2016, the U.S. Department of Justice announced it had completed a detailed examination of the evidence and found insufficient proof that a federal crime had occurred. The federal inquiry did not reopen the case, yet other troubling discoveries continued to emerge. When Kendrick Johnson's body was returned to the family after the original autopsy, mortuary staff had filled the torso cavity with newspapers rather than replacing the removed organs. While this practice can sometimes occur during body preparation after autopsies, the discovery shocked the family and deepened their mistrust of the investigation. The Johnson family has continued to push for additional reviews of the evidence for more than a decade. In 2021, local authorities briefly reopened the case after receiving new information from a private investigator working with the family. The sheriff's office later stated that the material did not provide sufficient grounds to change the original findings. Today, Kendrick Johnson's death remains officially classified as an accidental suffocation caused by positional asphyxia inside the gym mat. Yet the unusual circumstances of the discovery, the conflicting medical interpretations, and the lingering disputes over evidence have prevented the case from fading quietly. For many people in Valdosta and far beyond, the image of a teenager found upside down inside a wrestling mat inside his own school gym continues to raise a question that investigators say has already been answered: the killing of Doug Johnston, Arizona, 1997. On the night of August 14, 1997, 39-year-old Douglas Doug Johnston left his small office in Mesa, Arizona, shortly after finishing paperwork for the construction supply company he managed with two business partners. Johnston was known among colleagues as quiet and methodical. He kept a predictable routine. Most evenings, he drove straight home to the suburban neighborhood where he lived with his wife, Linda, and their young daughter. That night, however, something interrupted the routine. At approximately 9:40 p.m., a passing driver noticed Johnston's pickup truck parked at an angle along a dim industrial access road near the intersection of East McKellips Road and North Higley Road, an area surrounded by storage yards and empty lots. The truck's driver's side door was partially open. When police arrived minutes later, they found Johnston lying on the ground beside the vehicle. He had been shot twice in the chest. Paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene. Detectives from the Mesa Police Department began canvassing the area, but the industrial corridor was mostly deserted after dark. Few businesses in the area had security cameras in the late 1990s, and witnesses were scarce. Johnston's wallet was missing, and investigators initially believed the killing had been the result of a robbery that escalated into violence. The truck itself showed no signs of forced entry or prolonged struggle. Johnston's keys were still in the ignition, and paperwork from his office sat neatly on the passenger seat. The scene suggested he may have stopped voluntarily or been approached quickly after parking. Within weeks, police focused their attention on a local man named Eric Molina, a 22-year-old with a history of minor theft and drug-related arrests. According to investigators, Molina had been seen earlier that evening near a convenience store less than a mile from where Johnston's body was discovered. A witness told police that Molina appeared nervous and had asked if anyone knew a place where he could ditch something. Detectives later reported that Molina gave inconsistent statements during questioning. In one interview, he said he had been walking home from a friend's apartment. In another, he suggested he had been drinking nearby but could not remember details. After nearly 12 hours of interrogation, Molina signed a written statement indicating he had approached Johnston's truck intending to rob him and that the situation had got out of control. The statement became the foundation of the prosecution's case. Yet several elements of the investigation soon drew criticism. The murder weapon was never recovered. Police could not establish a clear timeline placing Molina at the exact location of the shooting when it occurred. The witness who reported Molina's suspicious behavior admitted he never actually saw him near Johnston's vehicle. During the trial in Maricopa County Superior Court in 1999, Molina's defense attorney argued that the confession had been obtained under pressure. According to court transcripts, Molina told the jury he had signed the statement because he believed he would be allowed to go home afterward. He claimed detectives had fed him key details about the crime during questioning. Prosecutors rejected this claim, stating the confession included information that had not been released publicly. The jury ultimately convicted Molina of second-degree murder and armed robbery. He was sentenced to 25 years in state prison. Officially, the case was considered solved, yet doubts began to circulate even before the trial concluded. Johnston's family publicly questioned the robbery theory, pointing to the fact that his credit cards and identification were later found discarded in a drainage ditch nearly 3 miles away, an area investigators never linked to Molina's movements that night. In addition, Johnston was known to carry very little cash, usually less than $20. Some of his co-workers suggested another possibility. In the months leading up to his death, Johnston had reportedly been involved in disputes with a subcontractor connected to several delayed building projects. According to statements later collected by private investigators hired by the family, Johnston had complained about financial irregularities involving material shipments. Those leads were briefly examined, but never developed into formal suspects. Detectives maintained that the evidence against Molina remained the strongest explanation for the killing. Years later, new questions emerged when portions of the original interrogation recordings were reviewed by legal researchers examining disputed confessions. Portions of Molina's questioning appeared to contain long pauses and moments where detectives repeated details about the shooting before Molina echoed them in his statement. Supporters of Molina argued this suggested key facts may have been suggested during the interview process. Prosecutors countered that such techniques were standard during interrogations and did not invalidate the confession. Doug Johnston's murder remains officially closed in police records. The state's case rests on a single written confession and circumstantial evidence linking a young man to a robbery that turned deadly on a quiet Arizona road. But the missing weapon, the uncertain witness accounts, and the unresolved questions surrounding Johnston's business dealings have left lingering doubts for some observers. Nearly 3 decades later, the location where his truck was found has changed dramatically. Industrial warehouses and new developments now stand where the empty lots once stretched into darkness. Yet the details of that August night remain fixed in the original police file. A parked pickup truck, 2 gunshots in the dark, and a case that authorities say was solved, even as questions about what truly happened to Doug Johnston continue to surface. The death of Mitris Richardson, California, 2009. On the evening of September 16, 2009, 24-year-old Mitris Richardson drove north from Los Angeles toward Malibu, along the winding curves of Pacific Coast Highway. Richardson was known to friends and family as intelligent and independent. She had recently graduated from California State University Fullerton with a degree in psychology and had begun exploring opportunities in music and writing. That night, shortly after 8 p.m., she entered Jeffrey's, a well-known restaurant perched above the ocean in Malibu. Staff members soon noticed her behavior was unusual. According to restaurant employees, Richardson began speaking about being from Mars and told diners she was there to avenge the death of Michael Jackson. Witnesses later said she seemed confused and disoriented. When Richardson was unable to pay her bill, which totaled around $90, restaurant staff contacted the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Deputies from the Lost Hills Sheriff's Station arrived shortly before 9:30 p.m. Richardson was cooperative but appeared to be experiencing a mental health episode. She was arrested on suspicion of defrauding an innkeeper, a misdemeanor charge, and transported approximately 10 miles inland to the Lost Hills Station for booking. Records show Richardson arrived at the station around 10:30 p.m. During the booking process, deputies ran a background check and confirmed she had no outstanding warrants and no criminal history. Meanwhile, Richardson's mother, Lettice Sutton, learned about the arrest after receiving a call from Jeffrey's staff, who had found her contact information. Concerned about her daughter's mental state, Sutton immediately began calling the sheriff's station. She spoke with a deputy and offered to drive from Los Angeles to pick Mitris up. According to Sutton, she was told Richardson would likely be released in the morning once the booking process was complete. Sutton later said she asked deputies not to release her daughter alone because she did not know the Malibu area and had no car or phone with her. Richardson's vehicle had been impounded and towed from the restaurant parking lot. However, sometime after midnight, deputies made a different decision. At approximately 12:28 a.m. on September 17th, Richardson was released from the Lost Hills Station. Surveillance footage showed her walking out the front door of the station alone into the darkness. The station sits along Las Virgenes Road, surrounded by steep hills and sparsely populated canyon terrain. At that hour, there were no open businesses nearby and very little traffic. Richardson had no wallet, no phone, and no transportation. Deputies later stated she had appeared calm during the booking process and was legally eligible for release once the citation paperwork was completed. After leaving the station, Richardson disappeared. For nearly 11 months, there was no confirmed trace of her. Search efforts by family members, volunteers, and law enforcement focused on the surrounding Santa Monica Mountains. The terrain in the area is rugged and difficult to navigate even during daylight. Steep ravines cut through the hills, covered by dense brush and rocky slopes. Some investigators initially believed Richardson may have attempted to walk back toward Malibu along the dark canyon roads. Others speculated she could have entered the hills surrounding the station. During the early months of the search, Richardson's family repeatedly criticized the sheriff's department for releasing her alone in the middle of the night, despite concerns about her mental condition. Officials defended the decision, stating that legally they could not hold her without medical cause once the citation had been issued. The case remained a missing person investigation until August 9, 2010, when park rangers discovered human remains in a remote canyon area known as Dark Canyon, roughly 6 miles from the sheriff's station. The remains were partially scattered across the hillside. Nearby investigators located personal items belonging to Richardson, including clothing and jewelry. The location was steep and difficult to access, requiring investigators to hike into the area on foot. The Los Angeles County coroner later confirmed the remains belonged to Mitris Richardson. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, the coroner was unable to determine a precise cause of death. The official ruling listed the cause as undetermined. The discovery raised additional questions. Richardson's skeletal remains were found several hundred feet below a ridge in terrain that would have been extremely difficult to reach in darkness. Some observers questioned how she could have traveled that far into the mountains without supplies or light. Another point of controversy involved the handling of the recovery site. Members of Richardson's family later said they were disturbed to learn that investigators had initially left the remains in place overnight before completing the full recovery process the following day. Sheriff's officials stated this decision was made due to the steep terrain and fading daylight. Over time, the circumstances surrounding Richardson's release and the location where her remains were discovered became the subject of multiple reviews and legal disputes. In 2011, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department conducted an internal investigation into the handling of the case. The report concluded that deputies had followed department policy when releasing Richardson. However, the report acknowledged communication failures between deputies and Richardson's family on the night of the arrest. Civil lawsuits filed by the family alleged negligence and wrongful death, arguing that deputies knew Richardson was vulnerable and should not have released her alone in such an isolated area. Those legal battles continued for years, bringing renewed attention to the case each time new records or testimony surfaced. Today, more than a decade later, the final hours of Mistress Richardson's life remain unclear. She was last seen walking away from a sheriff's station in the early hours of the morning into a canyon landscape miles from the ocean road where her evening began. Nearly a year later, her remains were found deep in the surrounding hills, in a place where few people travel and where the path she may have taken remains uncertain. The official cause of her death remains undetermined. The murder of Ken McElroy, Missouri, 1981. On the morning of July 10, 1981, the town of Skidmore, Missouri, gathered inside the D&G Tavern along Main Street. Skidmore was a farming community of roughly 400 residents, a place where most people knew each other by name. That morning's meeting had been called to discuss a problem that had troubled the town for years. At the center of it was a man named Ken Rex McElroy. McElroy was 47 years old, tall and heavily built, known for wearing cowboy boots, sunglasses, and carrying a rifle in the back window of his pickup truck. For nearly 2 decades, residents had accused him of theft, intimidation, arson, assault, and harassment. Court records showed that McElroy had been charged with more than 20 crimes over the years, yet he had rarely spent time behind bars. Witnesses frequently refused to testify. Some later said they were afraid of retaliation. Others claimed their property had been burned or their livestock killed after speaking against him. The final incident before the meeting involved a local grocer named Ernest Bo Bauenkamp. In July 1980, Bowenkamp accused McElroy of stealing candy from his store. During an argument outside the shop, McElroy allegedly shot Bowenkamp in the neck with a shotgun. Bowenkamp survived, but the shooting shocked the town. McElroy was arrested and later convicted of assault. However, he was released on bond while appealing the sentence. By the summer of 1981, McElroy was back in Skidmore, driving through town daily, often armed, sometimes accompanied by his much younger wife, Trina. Many residents believed the justice system had failed to protect them. The meeting inside the D&G Tavern that morning drew more than 40 townspeople. They discussed organizing a neighborhood watch and exploring legal ways to remove McElroy from the community. Nodaway County Sheriff Dan Estes attended briefly but left before the meeting ended. According to later accounts, Estes told residents they needed to remain calm and allow the courts to handle the situation. Around midday, the meeting broke up. People began leaving the tavern and stepping onto the street outside. At approximately the same time, Ken McElroy arrived in his pickup truck and parked directly in front of the building. Trina McElroy sat beside him in the passenger seat. Witnesses later said the truck engine remained running. Dozens of residents stood nearby along the gravel road and sidewalk. Some accounts estimated nearly 60 people were present. What happened next lasted only seconds. According to Trina McElroy's later statement, 2 gunshots suddenly rang out. Ken McElroy slumped forward behind the steering wheel. He had been struck by bullets from at least 2 different firearms. One round hit the back of his head, another struck his neck. The truck slowly rolled forward before coming to a stop against the curb. Several people rushed toward the vehicle. Others quickly walked away. No one attempted to chase the shooters. When sheriff's deputies arrived shortly afterward, they encountered an unusual situation. Dozens of witnesses had been standing in the open street when the shots were fired. Yet when investigators began asking questions, no one claimed to have seen who pulled the trigger. Even individuals standing only a few feet from the truck said they could not identify the shooter. The silence remained consistent during repeated interviews. According to official reports, Trina McElroy initially told investigators she believed the shots came from somewhere behind the truck. However, she later said she could not clearly identify the gunman. Some witnesses told reporters that several rifles had appeared in the crowd just moments before the shooting. Others denied seeing any weapons at all. Missouri State Highway Patrol officers joined the investigation later that day. They collected shell casings from the street and examined the pickup truck. Ballistics analysis confirmed that at least 2 different rifles had been used. Despite this evidence, investigators were unable to link any specific weapon to a suspect. The case quickly attracted national attention. Newspapers across the country described the killing as an act of vigilante justice carried out in full view of an entire town. Prosecutors faced an unusual challenge. Although many residents had been present during the shooting, the near-total lack of cooperation made it impossible to build a clear timeline of events. In the months that followed, a grand jury was convened to examine the evidence. Witnesses were called to testify under oath. The outcome was the same. Residents consistently claimed they had not seen the shooters or could not remember details. One man later told investigators that when the shots were fired, people simply turned and walked away. Sheriff Dan Estes later summarized the situation bluntly in interviews with reporters. According to Estes, the entire town appeared to have adopted the same response. No one saw anything. Without witnesses willing to identify suspects, prosecutors had little chance of securing indictments. The investigation gradually stalled. Over the years, journalists and authors returned to Skidmore to interview residents about the event. Many acknowledged that tensions with McElroy had been building for years. Several described the atmosphere in the town before the shooting as one of fear and frustration. Yet, when asked directly about who fired the shots, answers remained vague or non-existent. Some residents claimed the identity of the gunman was widely known within the community. Others insisted they truly did not know who was responsible. Ken McElroy was buried a few days after the shooting in a cemetery just outside Skidmore. The case file remains officially open with the Nodaway County Sheriff's Office. No one has ever been charged with the killing. The truck where McElroy died was eventually removed from the street, and the D&G Tavern later closed. The town itself remains small and quiet, surrounded by farmland and gravel roads. But the events of that summer day in 1981 still stand as one of the most unusual homicide investigations in American history. A man was shot to death in broad daylight, surrounded by dozens of witnesses, and yet the official record still lists the same conclusion that investigators reached within hours of the crime. No one saw the shooter. The death of Tamla Horsford, Georgia, 2018. On the evening of November 3, 2018, 40-year-old Tamla Horsford arrived at a suburban home in Forsyth County, Georgia, for what was meant to be a casual overnight gathering. The house belonged to a woman named Jean McPhillamy, who had invited several friends to spend the night together while their husbands were away on a weekend hunting trip. The group planned to watch football, play games, and relax. Tamla Horsford, a mother of 5 originally from the Caribbean island of St. Vincent, was one of the guests. She had moved to the United States years earlier and had built a quiet life in the Atlanta suburbs with her husband, Leander Horsford, and their children. According to people who knew her, Tamla was outgoing and social. She often volunteered at school events and community gatherings. The women arrived throughout the evening carrying food, wine, and overnight bags. Surveillance cameras on the property captured several of them entering the house shortly after sunset. Inside, the group spent the night talking and watching college football games on television. According to statements later given to investigators, the atmosphere was relaxed. Some guests said they drank alcohol throughout the evening. At one point, Tamla reportedly stepped outside onto the backyard deck to smoke cigarettes. The deck sat elevated above the sloped backyard, about 14 feet above the ground, with a staircase leading down into the yard. Shortly before midnight, several guests said they went to sleep in different rooms around the house. Tamla remained downstairs in the basement living area, where she had set up a spot to rest. According to witness statements, she continued smoking outside periodically during the night. Sometime during the early morning hours of November 4th, Tamla Horsford left the basement and went out onto the deck again. What happened next remains uncertain. At approximately 7:30 a.m., one of the guests stepped outside into the backyard. She noticed a body lying face down in the grass near the rear of the house. It was Tamla Horsford. Emergency services were called immediately. When deputies from the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office arrived, they found Horsford unresponsive. Paramedics pronounced her dead at the scene. Investigators began documenting the area beneath the deck. Tamla's body was located several feet away from the wooden staircase leading down from the deck. A half-empty pack of cigarettes and a lighter were found nearby. According to the initial sheriff's report, the scene showed no immediate signs of a struggle. Detectives interviewed the women who had attended the gathering. Their accounts were generally consistent. Most said they had gone to sleep at different times during the night and had not heard any disturbance outside. Several told investigators that Tamla had consumed alcohol earlier in the evening, but did not appear heavily intoxicated when they last saw her. The medical examiner later conducted an autopsy. The report concluded that Horsford had died from multiple blunt force injuries consistent with a fall from height. Toxicology results indicated the presence of alcohol and a sleep aid medication in her system. The official manner of death was listed as accidental. According to investigators, the most likely scenario was that Horsford had fallen over the railing of the deck during the early morning hours. However, questions soon emerged after details of the investigation became public. Photographs from the scene showed Tamla's body positioned several feet from the deck's edge. Some observers questioned whether the trajectory of a fall from the railing would have placed her farther from the structure. Others focused on injuries described in the autopsy report, including lacerations on her right wrist and head trauma. The medical examiner stated these injuries were consistent with impact during the fall. Critics argued they could also suggest other possibilities. Additional scrutiny followed when it was revealed that one of the party guests had briefly worked with the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office years earlier, while another guest's relative was a local law enforcement officer. Authorities said those connections had no influence on the investigation and emphasized that the case had been reviewed by multiple officials. In the months that followed, Tamla Horsford's family continued raising concerns about the circumstances surrounding her death. They questioned the speed with which the case had been classified as accidental and pointed to inconsistencies they believed existed in witness statements. The family also noted that initial interviews had not been recorded on video. Investigators later conducted follow-up interviews and released portions of the case file to the public. According to the sheriff's office, forensic analysis found no evidence of a physical altercation. Detectives stated that the railing height and the layout of the deck made it possible for someone to accidentally fall over while leaning or losing balance. In 2019, after growing public attention and online discussion about the case, the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office requested that the Georgia Bureau of Investigation conduct an independent review. The GBI examined the original evidence, interviewed witnesses again, and analyzed the forensic findings. In early 2020, the Bureau announced it had found no evidence of foul play and agreed with the original conclusion that the death was accidental. Despite those findings, the circumstances of Tamla Horsford's death continue to be debated. She was the only person outside the home when the fatal fall occurred. No one reported hearing the moment she went over the railing. Surveillance cameras on the property did not capture the area where her body was found. The timeline between the final moments when she was seen alive and the discovery of her body remains uncertain. Today, the official record states that Tamla Horsford died from an accidental fall from a backyard deck during a late-night gathering. Yet for her family and many who have followed the case, the quiet suburban house in Forsyth County still represents a scene where the full sequence of events has never been completely explained. Thank you for staying until the end. Sometimes the quiet spaces between official answers and forgotten details hold the weight of what truly happened, where time softens the noise of certainty and the truth lingers somewhere in the silence.